Hey, guess what? Right now, your hips are tilted, and Blake here is gonna help you fix it.
Let's go.
What's going on? Coach Brian here with Criticalbench. Welcome to our channel. And this guy, it's an honor to be standing next to Blake Bowman here with Guerrillazen Fitness. He is a holistic practitioner. He is a guru when it comes to functional movement and corrective exercises. And I'm excited because Blake here is going to show you and me how to fix shifted pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt, Blake, what exactly is that in a nutshell?
Yeah, good question. First of all, it's good to be here, Brian. Pelvic tilt is when your pelvic tilts, your pelvis tilts, I should say. Most people have something going on called anterior pelvic tilt, which means that the front of their pelvis is tilted forwards like that, and their butt is sticking out. Oftentimes, your hips are gonna be really, really tight when you have this, and so is your low back. So that's what we're gonna be teaching you how to fix today.
Cool. Yeah, we've all seen those Instagram models that walk around like this. They could definitely watch this video. So yeah, posterior pelvic tilt is just the opposite of that, where you can have excessive posterior pelvic tilt where you're hunched like this.
Yeah,
this is not, yeah, this is not good as well, but we're gonna get into some exercises here in just a second to get your body back into its natural alignment, which is optimal for health, performance, you name it, it's just where you need to be. So Blake, again, Guerrillazen Fitness, make sure you check out his channel. We've been following his content for a long time, and I know you're gonna love it just as much as we love it. So you can click that banner right up there, check out his channel. So what is the most effective way? Obviously, there's a lot that goes into this fixing.
Yeah.
You need an assessment, but what are some basic things, a couple stretches that somebody like our viewer right now can take and apply right now?
For sure. In order to answer that question, you need to understand what kind of muscular imbalances are involved around the hips when this occurs. And typically that's gonna be too much tension and tightness in the TFL, the quads here. There's also gonna be too much tension in the lower back here. The tension back here pulls up on the back of the hips. The tension here pulls down on the front, and this happens, okay? So we need to be focusing on stretching and releasing these tissues, and then subsequently strengthening the glutes, which will pull the back of the pelvis down, and strengthening the core. So what we're gonna focus on today are these four corners, if you will, of the pelvis. This area, the top front, and the bottom of the front, the bottom of the back, and the top of the back. And we're gonna be stretching these back here, strengthening these by addressing those four corners of the pelvis with good strengthening and stretching exercises that basically will help you permanently fix your anterior pelvic tilt.
Awesome, let's do it. Cool, so before we get started with these four exercises, now, real quick, if you need something a little more professional, like I'm not saying we're not professional, but something more structured, like an actual follow-along routine, we've got this product called Unlock Your Hip Flexors. Follow along, you can implement this daily. It's gonna stretch out everything that you need to get your hips back into a neutral position. So right now, if you want more information about this real quick, click underneath this video in the pin link in the comment section. That's gonna take you to that product page. So let's get started. What's the first thing that, we've got the four corners. Where do you start with?
Yeah, so one thing that we definitely want to start with is the hip flexors, okay? So basically to do this, we're gonna do a classic hip flexor stretch, a hip opener. You see this all the time. People do this wrong though, a lot. So we're gonna show you how to do it the right way, okay? So again, this is unlocking those four corners. This is starting with unlocking these tissues here, the TFL primarily, and kind of opening up the anterior frontal tissues of the hip here. So pretty much the best way to do this, you put one foot down, your foot's gonna be flexed like this, other foot goes out in front, okay? And what you're gonna do here is you're gonna squeeze your glute and push your hips forwards like this, okay? Now, this is pretty nuanced. It looks pretty simple. And what a lot of people do wrong here, Brian, is they'll extend the lumbar spine even more. They'll arch the back even more. They'll go like this, okay? When you're doing that,
yeah, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, if you have anterior pelvic tilt already, that's gonna make your back feel worse.
Yeah.
And it's not even stretching the hip flexors in the first place, okay? So it's important when you're doing this to get out of this frontal tilted position and posteriorly tilt, okay? So you're kind of tucking the butt underneath you and you're squeezing this glute as hard as you can, okay? The glutes are antagonist muscles to the hip flexors, meaning that they do the opposite job. If your hip flexors are really tight, as they probably are if you have anterior pelvic tilt in the first place, then your glutes are probably also weak. So this is a good opportunity to kind of prime the glutes and get extra contraction in there as you're doing it. So you can hold this for 30 seconds isometrically or statically, or you can do like a little priming, like a little activation, more of a dynamic stretch where you kind of sink forward, squeeze the glute, come back. Sink forward, squeeze the glute, come back. But that's what we're gonna start with. That's gonna help open up these frontal tissues. You're gonna do that on both hips.
Yeah, that's one of the exercises that I see way too many people, even these quote unquote professionals on YouTube saying, oh, just get right into this position and do this. But I mean, when you understand the body and how the body operates, like you have to just respect the body and get your body into the position to allow it to do what it's necessarily designed to do.
Yeah.
So really emphasize, and if you're having a hard time squeezing your glutes and you don't know what that feels like, we've got other videos on our channel here that talk about glute activation and what it actually feels like to activate your glutes. So go back on our channel here. You can subscribe to our channel now. Make sure you hit that notification bell to stay, get an alert every time you, ow. That's one way to activate those muscles, just tense up. Ow. You missed.
They hit you pretty hard there, man. Wow, they're mean up in here.
No, it's all good, but they activated my muscles because I quickly tensed up. That's the whole reason why we activate our muscles. So again, real quick before moving on to the next one, squeeze that glute as hard as you can. And if you don't feel it activating, obviously you need to strengthen your glutes. So, and that's one of the things that we're gonna cover.
Yeah, and having tight hip flexors can inhibit the glutes in the first place. So that stretch is really gonna be very beneficial for a lot of people.
Sweet, so second exercise or second movement?
Yeah, so the second movement, we're gonna kind of switch more to the back side of the pelvis now and do some glute activation, glute strengthening. And you're actually gonna get more benefit from doing this if you do this in order that we just showed you, because like I said, those frontal hip muscles here, when they become tight, that's gonna inhibit the glutes from working a little bit, okay? So if we stretch out the front of the hips like we just did prior to doing this exercise, that's gonna open up a window of opportunity for our glutes to work a little bit more, to get a little bit more contraction in there than we would otherwise get, and we'll basically just get more benefit from the exercise.
That sounds like a lot of my videos that I've been talking recently. People are like, oh, I can't get a good glute squeeze. I'm like, well, how are your hips? Oh, my hips are fine. Do you stretch out your hip flexors? No. Well, okay, how do you expect to get good glute activation with tight hips? So I appreciate you saying that, and we totally did not rehearse that. So it's not just me, my opinion, it's also another expert saying the exact same thing. Yep. And he actually lives probably 1,500 miles away.
Yeah, in the frozen north, dude, above the wall.
Yeah, we're here in Florida, he's in Michigan, so we're here to do it. So all right, so glutes, let's do it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can do to strengthen the glutes. We're gonna be making more videos about this. One of the most basic exercises there is a hip thruster. And for most people, that's all you really need to be doing to get a really good glute squeeze, get good glute activation. And it's pretty simple to do that. You're basically just gonna lay on your back like this. You want your knees at around 90 degrees, okay? And what you're gonna do here, it's really advantageous to do that posterior pelvic tilt again, okay? So if you're somebody that has anterior pelvic tilt, just laying on your back like this, you might notice that you have this big arch underneath your lower back. So kind of neutralize that by tipping the pelvis this way, squeeze your abs, okay? And maintain this posterior tilt of the pelvis as you push your hips up and squeeze your glutes really hard at the top. So you're squeezing your butt muscles really, really hard, okay? Your butt muscles are only gonna work at their maximal capacity at end range hip extension, which is like at the very top of this, okay? So you might not feel the glutes very much from like here to here, let's say, but it's right about there where you're gonna feel the glutes working the most. So really squeeze the glutes hard. If you're having a hard time feeling them contract, you can palpate them, which means you're giving yourself a little bit of a stimulus with your hands. You're grabbing your butt cheeks and kind of squeezing them. That will help create a mind-muscle connection with the glutes and help you squeeze them harder. But this is pretty much it. This is something you can do for 4 sets of 10. What you really want to make sure you're doing here is not anteriorly tilting your pelvis more, okay? So you don't want to be kind of letting the pelvis roll this way, and you don't want to be arching your back. If you're feeling this in your lower back while you're doing it, then you probably are extending the lumbar spine, meaning that you're arching that lower back. So we want to keep the core tight, and we want to keep that pelvis tucked underneath while we're doing this, and really emphasize that glute contraction while we're doing it.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking now this might be a better video for another day, where you have a shift in your hips. So think of your hips as a 5-gallon bucket. When you're talking anterior pelvic tilt, water is being poured forward out of the bucket. posterior pelvic tilt is water being poured the back of the bucket.
Yep.
Now, these don't necessarily apply to one side being, for instance, like your right side being down lower or in your left side being higher. So now you're pouring water out the sides of the bucket. These will help it, but then I would propose unilateral training, you know, really fixing it, but also bracing different exercises. So this is more for the people that have hips that are tilted forward or backwards. There's a lot more that can go into like limb length, you know, flat foot versus arch. There's a lot more that goes into the shifting of the hips rather than front to back. So I probably should have warned you that at the beginning of this video, but nonetheless, we all suffer from tight hip flexors, anterior pelvic tilt, just because we live in a modern world and we're constantly sitting.
Yeah,
so.
you mentioned it at the beginning of the video, posterior pelvic tilt is another thing that can happen. It's the opposite of anterior pelvic tilt, but we see that a lot less frequently than we see anterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah.
You know, lots of people have anterior pelvic tilt, lots of people have really tight low backs, really tight hip flexors, and that really comes about as a result of sitting, which we all do.
Yeah, so even if you consider yourself having healthy hips, and in a neutral position, you still can gain a lot of good from these exercises. So everybody, in other words, everybody has something to learn from these 4 moves. So let's get into the third one and keep moving.
Yep. So the third one, we're gonna start to strengthen those muscles on the top of the front side. So far we've addressed the muscles on the lower half of the pelvis on both the front and the back, right? We stretch those hip flexors, we strengthen the glutes. That's gonna help relieve some of that tension here that's tipping us forward. That's gonna help promote some tension here, which will tip us back. Now we need to address these 2 corners, okay? So there's a lot of different core exercises you can do, specific to correcting anterior pelvic tilt. But what we'll focus on today is something called the RKC plank, or a plank with a posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, and this is a very, very powerful exercise because it opens up your hips. It actually gets your glutes to work and your core all at the same time.
It's a crazy exercise.
It is, especially for fixing this issue with the pelvis. It's very, very powerful. Yeah. So basically to do this, you set up just like you're doing a normal plank on your elbows. So you want your elbows underneath your shoulders. You're gonna extend your feet back behind you, like in push-up position. I like to actually widen my feet a little bit more than shoulder width when I do this, okay? So the way that this is different from just a regular plank is you're actually going to tuck the pelvis underneath you like this, okay? So you're coming out of this, again, anterior tilted position, and you're pulling the hips underneath you, okay? And in the act of doing that, you're squeezing your core even harder, and you're squeezing your butt muscles as well, okay? So then you're just gonna hold this position like, a dog with its tail tucked between its legs. You're gonna hold that for 30 seconds isometrically. You can do that for 4 sets of 30 seconds. Make sure that your hips aren't sagging. You want them at like the same level as the shoulders are. It's okay if you're really doing this specific to correct the hip position. If you get a little bit of rounding in the upper back, you're probably going to get that, a little bit of flexion. That's okay. What we really want to be focusing on is squeezing the abs and the butt as hard as possible and maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt throughout that exercise.
Yeah, and that's another thing, a verbal cue to intensify it, to make sure you're getting a good core activation is imagine your elbows driving towards your feet. So you're trying to bridge that gap between your elbows and your feet. And obviously you can't because you're going against isometric resistance. But you want to get the most out of this. You want to activate the muscles. You don't want to just be in a stabilized position. You want to be in an active, stabilized position, if that makes any type of sense. So 100%. It's a tough exercise. The first time I was introduced that years ago, I'm like, I can do a plank for a few minutes. And this, I was like, I can struggle for 15 seconds. And I'm like, wow, I'm already shaking.
Yeah, people always say plank's easy, or they view plank as like a, novice. Or like a beginner exercise, a rest. But it really is contingent on how hard you're contracting your muscles, right? Yeah. The difficulty of doing a plank comes down to you and how hard you're squeezing and how much effort you're putting into it, right? Yeah. And ideally, you're gonna be putting so much effort into this by squeezing your core and your butt so hard and drawing your elbows down towards your, you should only be able to do that for like 30 seconds. Yeah. If you can go way longer than 30 seconds, you're probably not contracting your muscles hard enough. Right. And you're just not getting as much value from the exercise as you would if you were squeezing harder.
Yeah, so let's finish this video and get the fourth exercise and
wrap it up. So, the low back is kind of tricky. There's not a lot of, you don't want to foam roll that area too much. A lot of people have this issue with the low back where it's a little too mobile. We call that hypermobility. That predisposes you to injury down there. So we don't want to do too much to the lower back, and frankly, when it comes to fixing this issue of the pelvis, we really want to focus on kind of the areas that we've already focused on. Just as a little bonus, we can get into that lower back. And one really simple way to address those tissues and kind of get some release in those tight low back muscles is child's pose. I really like child's pose for this, which is a yoga pose. It's pretty simple. You basically just start on your knees like this. You're going to sink back your heels, your butt to your heels, and you're going to put your arms out in front of you like this, okay? And this is pretty much it. You're gonna hold this statically, or isometrically, like I said, or statically, not isometrically. But you're just gonna hang out in this position, and if you want to like kind of open up one side more than the other, you can kind of move your arms over to the side and lean in this way. You can do the same the other way, but this is a really gentle, static stretch for the lower back, and there's a lot of muscles that attach down there that are actually getting stretched with this, okay? Like the lats, for example, especially when you go over to the side like that. So there's not too much aggressive stretching that we can do for the lower back to really get like a profound release like what we did for the front of the hips, just because that area is pretty sensitive. But that is a very good thing to do in this whole sequence, you know, along with the other exercises that we showed today.
It's considered more of like a passive stretch where the lower back, you need to give it some passive love. It's constantly being abused and often neglected, and that's why passive stretching for the lower back is, I think, is one of the best things to do. And that's why yoga really emphasizes the child's pose, because good yoga practitioners know the benefit of releasing that lower back. So, cool. So 4 exercises, and obviously there's many more.
Tons more.
Yeah, many more, but these 4 can at least get you started on the right path of correction, of getting your body back into its natural position of design. And again, if you want to check out our Unlock Your Hip Flexors product, if you know you have excessively tight hip flexors, you got to address certain areas. Like if you know you're excessively weak in your glutes, strengthen your glutes. All of these have to work synergistically. But also you need to know where your body is at that current moment. If you need further assessments, further protocols, things like that, please do some research. Reach out to Blake at Guerrillazen Fitness. You can check him out on Instagram as well. You can message us all over the place. We're here to help you, and we want to connect with you on many different ways so you can live a healthier and happier life. So Blake, awesome, good stuff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
That's it. Have an awesome day. We'll see you in the next video.